I still have the key card. I know I shouldn't have kept it, but 3 years later it's still sitting in the bottom drawer of my desk in Tampa, and some nights I take it out just to remind myself I didn't imagine any of it. My name is Denise Okafor. I was 26 years old when I took a job as a cabin steward on a mid-sized cruise line running 7-night routes out of Port Canaveral, Florida, down through the Bahamas and back. I'd been a hotel housekeeper in Orlando for 2 years before that, and the pay bump plus free room and board sounded like a way to finally pay off my car. I didn't think about ghosts. I didn't think about anything except tips and getting through my contract. The ship, I won't use its real name because I signed papers and because after what happened I don't want anyone going looking for it, held about 2,800 passengers and 1,100 crew. I was assigned Deck 7, the mid-level of cabins, mostly balcony rooms for families and retired couples. My shift started at 7 in the morning and I usually didn't finish my second round of turn-down service until almost 10 at night. Steward life is repetitive. You learn the rhythm of a hallway, whose door sticks, which family leaves a mess of pretzel crumbs every single day, which elderly man tips $5 and asks about your family like he actually wants to know. Room 7114 was not supposed to be occupied. I found that out on a Tuesday, my 4th week aboard, during the second cruise of my contract. I had my card in the hallway, my master key card clipped to my hip, and I was going down my list: 7,108, 7,110, 7,112, checked off, checked off, checked off. Then I got to 7,114, and the room wasn't on my list at all. It skipped straight from 7,112 to 7,116. I figured it was a clerical error, maybe a room being held for maintenance, so I moved on. But when I passed it again that evening for turn down, I noticed the Do Not Disturb sign was hanging on the handle, and underneath the door, just barely, I could see the shadow of feet. Someone was standing right behind the door, not walking, standing still. I remember laughing it off to myself. People do weird things on vacation. Maybe someone was waiting for room service. Maybe a kid was playing games with the door. I finished my hallway and didn't think much else of it until I got back to the crew office to log my checklist, and my supervisor, a stocky Filipino woman named Marisol, who'd been with the company for 11 years, looked at my sheet and got very quiet. "You didn't go in 7,114, right?" she said. "No, it's not on my list." "Good. Don't go near that door, not even to look at it." I asked her why, thinking maybe there was a biohazard or a passenger on some kind of medical quarantine. She wouldn't answer directly. She just said, "Some cabins get skipped. You don't ask why, you get through your contract, and you go home." I want to be honest with you. For about a week, I actually did forget about it. Cruise ship life eats your attention. You're moving nonstop, sleeping 4 hours in a windowless crew cabin with a roommate from Indonesia named Tantri who snored like a chainsaw, and every ounce of your brain is dedicated to surviving your shift. But room 7,114 kept showing up in small ways. I'd hear the ice machine on our hall run at 3 a.m., even though nobody but crew should have been up. I'd see the Do Not Disturb sign flip to "Please make up my room," and then flip back within the same hour, which never happens. People don't cancel housekeeping that fast. Once, folding towels in the linen closet at the end of the hall, I heard 2 short knocks on the wall that backed onto 7,114's bathroom, like someone rapping their knuckles to get someone else's attention. There was no plumbing work scheduled. I checked the maintenance log myself. The turning point happened on the 5th cruise of my contract, in early October. We'd left Port Canaveral in decent weather, but by the second night out, we picked up the edge of a storm system moving up from the Yucatan, and the ship rocked enough that half my passengers were seasick and ordering extra towels. I was exhausted, doing my rounds later than usual, past 11 at night, when I saw a man standing outside 7,114. He wasn't a passenger I recognized, and by that point in my contract, I recognized almost everyone on my hallway by sight. He was maybe 60, thin, wearing a cardigan that seemed too warm for a cruise ship, with silver hair combed very neatly to one side. He was standing with his hand flat against the door, not knocking, just resting his palm there, the way you'd comfort someone through a wall. I said, "Good evening, sir. Can I help you find your room?" He turned to look at me, and I remember his eyes were pale, almost colorless in the hallway light, and he said, "She doesn't answer anymore. She used to answer." I asked him who he meant. He said, "My daughter, room 7,114. She was 17. We lost her the third night out, 4 years ago. This exact ship. I come back every year on this same cruise. They let me. Nobody else can stay in that cabin. Corporate knows. They just don't put it on the books. I didn't know what to say to that. I offered to call security, thinking he might be confused or unwell, and he just smiled, not menacingly, more sadly than anything, and walked away down the hall toward the elevator bank, and I never saw him get in. I reported it to Marisol the next morning. She didn't seem surprised. She sat me down in the crew mess over reheated eggs and told me, in a low voice, checking over her shoulder twice, what she knew, which she said had been passed down steward to steward for years, half rumor and half confirmed by an officer she used to date. 4 years before I joined, a 17-year-old girl named Whitney had been on a family cruise with her father, cabin 7114, and had gone missing on the third night. Officially, cruise lines report roughly 20 to 25 people going overboard or disappearing worldwide each year across the whole industry. It's a real documented number that the companies do not advertise. Whitney's case was ruled an accidental fall, but Marisol said the crew who worked that voyage never fully believed it. There had been a fight recorded on hallway camera between Whitney and a young male crew member from the entertainment staff, hours before she vanished. He'd been quietly let go at the next port, and the company settled with the family fast and hard. Fast enough that Marisol said it reeked of a payout to keep it out of the news. After that, cabin 7114 developed a reputation. Housekeeping staff who serviced it reported feeling watched. 2 stewards, in separate years, requested transfers off deck 7 entirely, and the father, Whitney's father, apparently had some kind of arrangement with the cruise line, an unofficial one, where he was allowed back on that same cabin, same week, same season, every year, free of charge, as long as he didn't talk to press and didn't cause trouble. It was cheaper for them to give a grieving man a free cabin once a year than to have him give interviews. I told Marisol what he'd said to me about his daughter not answering anymore, and Marisol's face went pale in a way I hadn't seen from her before. She said the last 3 years, according to what she'd heard, he used to talk about hearing his daughter's voice through that door. Different words, but this was the first time anyone had heard him say she'd stopped. I want to tell you the story ends there, with an old man's grief, and honestly, that would have been sad enough. But 2 nights later, I was doing my final round, close to midnight, hallway empty, storm still churning outside so the whole ship had a low, constant creak to it, like a house settling. I passed 7114. The Do Not Disturb sign was gone. The door was cracked open maybe 2 inches, black inside. I should have called security right there. I know that now. But I have never in my life been able to leave a job half-finished, and something in me, I think it was as much curiosity as duty, pushed the door open with my knuckle. The cabin was empty. Bed made, tight hospital corners like it had never been slept in. No luggage, no sign of the man I'd spoken to at all. The balcony door was open, curtain moving in the wind, and the storm noise was suddenly very loud. And on the mirror above the little desk, written in what I told myself at the time was lipstick, because the alternative was something I did not want to consider, were 4 words. She never left the ship. I did not sleep in the crew cabin that night. I sat in the crew mess with the lights on until my shift started again at 6. I filed an incident report. Security investigated and told me the cabin had been empty the whole voyage. Records showed no passenger assigned, no service requested, and that the writing on the mirror was likely a prank from a previous cleaning crew that had gone unnoticed. Marisol backed away from the conversation entirely after that. Told me she couldn't talk about it anymore, and 2 weeks later put in for a transfer to a different ship in the fleet. I finished my contract. I did not renew it. I never saw the man in the cardigan again, and when I looked up old maritime incident reports from years back, cross-referencing dates Marisol had given me, I did find a small local news item from a Georgia paper about a teenage girl who went missing on a cruise, body never recovered, case eventually closed as an accident. I don't know what I believe happened to Whitney. I don't know if her father is even still alive. I have no way to check without giving up too much about myself. What I do know is that I worked that hallway for 5 months, and cabin 7114 was never, not once, assigned to a paying guest. I still have the key card. It doesn't open anything anymore. Deactivates the moment you disembark, they told us. But some nights, when the apartment is quiet, and I hear the pipes groan the way the ship's hallway used to groan in a storm, I take it out of the drawer, and I remember that a door doesn't have to be locked for something to be kept inside it. Sometimes it just has to be believed shut. Story 10 in cabin 4021, who wasn't on any list by the time I noticed the man in 4021 didn't have a face I recognized from any photo the ship had on file. 3 people were already dead, and nobody wanted to say those deaths were connected. I did the math myself, alone, in a laundry closet on deck 4, and once I saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. My name is Marcus Webb. I was 31 from Cleveland, Ohio, working as assistant security on a large cruise ship sailing out of Galveston, Texas, doing week-long Western Caribbean routes. I'd been in the Coast Guard for 6 years before that, and cruise ship security seemed like an easy transition. Check Ides at the gangway, handle the occasional drunk fight at the casino bar, walk the decks at night. Boring, mostly. That's what everyone tells you. Boring, mostly, until it isn't. The first death happened at the company in late April. A 68-year-old man from Baton Rouge, traveling alone, was found by a steward slumped in his balcony chair on deck 9, dead of what the ship's doctor called a cardiac event. Nothing suspicious on the surface. Older man, warm weather, maybe one too many rum punches the night before. We logged it. The body was held in the ship's small morgue facility. Every large cruise ship has one, tucked away near the crew areas, something passengers never think about, and we notified his family at the next port. Standard procedure. I didn't think about it again for almost 3 weeks. The second death was different, and it's the one that started nagging at me. A woman, 44, from Baton Rouge as well. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I certainly did. Was found unresponsive in her cabin on deck 4, cabin 4019, 2 doors down from a cabin, 4021, that according to my roster was unoccupied for the entire voyage. Her death was also ruled natural causes, an aneurysm. Tragic, but not uncommon statistically speaking on ships that carry thousands of people at a time. A lot of them older, a lot of them not in great health. Cruise lines don't advertise it. But statistically, a ship carrying 3,000 passengers over a week is going to have deaths sometimes purely on the actuarial math of an aging population traveling. I knew that. I'd been told that in training. It's why they build morgues into these ships in the first place. But 2 people from the same city, Baton Rouge, both found near cabin 4021, both within a month of each other. That's not something training prepares you to shrug off. I pulled the manifest for both sailings. I cross-referenced. The male passenger from the first death and the female passenger from the second had never sailed together, never booked together, no shared last name, no obvious connection except geography. I told myself it was coincidence. Baton Rouge is a city of over 200,000 people. Cruise lines run heavy Gulf Coast marketing in Louisiana. It made sense that a chunk of any given sailing's passengers might come from there. Then came cabin 4021 itself. I want to explain something about how cruise ship cabin assignments work, because it matters here. Every cabin on a ship is logged in the reservation system, whether it's sold or not. Held cabins, crew use cabins, cabins taken offline for maintenance are all tagged in a central database that security has read access to, because in an emergency we need to know exactly who is supposed to be where. Cabin 4021 was tagged permanently as Owner Reserve Do Not Assign. I asked my supervisor, a retired Navy chief named Halloran, who'd been doing ship security for almost 20 years, what Owner Reserve meant. He told me it usually meant a cabin was held for the ship's owner or a major shareholder for surprise inspections. Or sometimes it was a cabin quietly taken out of rotation after an incident. His word, not mine. Because relisting it too soon could get flagged by superstitious repeat cruisers who track this stuff on cruise forums online. He said don't worry about it, and I mostly didn't, until the third death. The third one happened on my next sailing, first week of June, hot as anything even at sea. The kind of Gulf heat that makes the deck railings too hot to touch by 10 in the morning. A 22-year-old man, also, I checked 3 times, from the Baton Rouge metro area, was reported missing by his girlfriend after failing to show up for the second formal dinner night. We searched the ship top to bottom, the way protocol requires, checking cabins, gym, casino, spa, even service corridors normal passengers never see. We found nothing. Standard next step in a disappearance at sea is to review the ship's CCTV footage timeline, working backward from the last confirmed sighting, which in his case was a bartender on deck 5, who remembered serving him a beer around 11:40 p.m. I pulled the footage myself because Halloran was off shift, and I wanted to get ahead of it before the captain started asking pointed questions in the morning. What I saw on the deck 4 hallway camera, time-stamped 12:14 a.m., made my hands go cold on the desk. The missing man was on camera, walking down deck 4, past his own cabin, and stopping outside 4021. The door to a cabin our own system said had been empty and unassigned for the entire voyage, the door to a cabin flagged Owner Reserve, Do Not Assign, opened from the inside. I could see, just barely in the grainy low-light footage, part of an arm reaching out, pale, and the missing man stepped inside willingly, almost eagerly, like he'd been expected. The door closed. He never appears on any camera on the ship again, not on any deck, not at any exit, not in any common area, for the rest of that voyage or the 2-day search that followed at port in Cozumel with local Mexican maritime authorities involved. I told Halloran what I'd found. He watched the footage with nothing for almost a full minute, then told me to send him the clip and let him handle escalation, which is company language for making a problem disappear from a junior employee's hands. 3 days later, I was informed the footage had been corrupted during transfer and could no longer be produced for the family's private investigator, who had by then been hired and was asking hard questions the cruise line's legal department clearly didn't want answered in a courtroom. I didn't let it go, though, not fully, because something about that pale arm reaching out of a door that was supposedly holding nothing but empty air had lodged itself somewhere I couldn't shake. I started asking older crew, quietly, off the clock, over cafeteria coffee, whether they knew anything about cabin 4021. Most had nothing. But one woman, a longtime spa employee named Renata, who'd been with the fleet almost 15 years across 3 different ships, told me something that still keeps me up some nights. She said every cruise line has at least one cabin, somewhere in the fleet, that gets treated this way. Flagged, held back, quietly kept off assignment, after something happens on board that the company can't fully explain and doesn't want investigated too closely, because an unsolved disappearance draws lawsuits and bad press. But a cabin with a history that crews simply avoid draws nothing but rumors that never make it past the crew bar. She said she'd heard, secondhand, that cabin 4021 had something to do with a family that used to own a controlling stake in the cruise line decades ago, before it went public, a family with a private ritual practice tied to some old maritime superstition about needing a toll paid to the sea every so often to keep a ship lucky. She admitted it sounded insane saying it out loud. She said she didn't fully believe it either. But she'd worked 8 different sailings on 3 different ships in this fleet over 15 years, and every single one of them had exactly one cabin, permanently unassignable, and every single one of them, if you dug into old incident logs like I had at least one unexplained disappearance tied to a passenger from a very specific hometown that seemed to rotate voyage to voyage, Baton Rouge on mine. She said on an earlier ship it had been Mobile, Alabama for almost 2 full years running. I want to be clear that I have no proof beyond what I saw with my own eyes on that grainy camera feed, and a secondhand story from a woman who might have simply been telling ghost stories to a green, anxious coworker to pass the time. I finished that contract. I did not sign another one. I now work fleet security consulting from a desk in Houston, and I have never set foot on a passenger cruise ship again, not even on vacation, not even when my own mother wanted the whole family to go for her 70th birthday last year. I told her, I get seasick. That was easier than, which is that somewhere out in the Gulf of Mexico right now, on a ship with thousands of happy vacationing families aboard, there is a cabin door with a number on it, sitting empty, waiting, and I am fairly certain it is not empty at all. Story 3, for his last album. Out of the 4,300 photos I took that week, there is exactly one photo I have never been able to delete and have never been able to look at for longer than a second, and it is the reason I quit cruise photography for good. My name is Renee Castillo. I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and for 2 years in my early 20s I worked as a shipboard photographer for a large cruise line running 7-night Alaska routes out of Seattle in the summer season and Caribbean routes out of Miami the rest of the year. It's a job most people don't think about. We're the ones who stop you at the gangway with a green screen, who show up at your dinner table with a camera and a forced smile, who set up backdrops at the top of the grand staircase so you can buy an 11 by 14 print of your family looking happier than you probably actually were that night. It's exhausting, low-paying work for the hours you put in, but I loved it in a strange way. I liked seeing people at the exact moment they let their guard down for a photo. This particular sailing was a Caribbean route out of Miami in late September, 7 nights, a fairly full ship, maybe 2,600 passengers. My team had 6 photographers rotating through different stations: embarkation, formal nights, the pool deck, shore excursions. I was assigned mostly to evening portrait work at the atrium staircase, which meant long shifts from 6 p.m. to well past midnight on formal nights, smiling at hundreds of strangers, telling them to say cheese, moving fast, because the line never stopped. The first strange thing, enough that I almost didn't register it as strange at all. On night 2, formal night, I photographed a family of 4, mother, father, 2 teenage daughters, at the top of the staircase, and when I reviewed the shot afterward on my camera's screen before printing, there was a 5th figure in the frame, standing slightly behind and to the left of the younger daughter, blurred the way a person moving quickly through frame gets blurred, translucent almost, but distinctly the shape of a person in a dark suit. I assumed another passenger had walked through my shot right as the shutter fired. It happens constantly on a crowded staircase, and I simply retook the photo. The second shot was clean. I didn't think about it again, except it happened again the next night. Formal night portraits for a different family entirely, no relation to the first. And this time the blurred figure was standing directly behind the father, close enough that in theory I should have physically bumped into whoever it was while setting up my tripod, since our staircase set was cordoned off from foot traffic during shooting hours specifically to prevent that kind of interference. I checked my cordon ropes. Nobody had walked through them. I checked with my assistant, a college kid from Michigan named Tyler, who was holding the second flash unit, and he swore nobody had passed by during the shot. I retook that photo too. Clean the second time. I told myself it was a lens flare or a shutter glitch from an aging camera body that had been dropped once during a rough excursion tender ride earlier that season. By night 4, I had photographed the same translucent figure in the background of 11 separate portraits, always different families, always unrelated passengers, always a person-shaped blur in dark formal wear, standing just close enough to someone in the frame to seem deliberate, and always gone completely on the immediate retake. I started keeping the flawed first shots instead of deleting them the way we were trained to, filing them into a private folder on my laptop out of a mixture of curiosity and a low, creeping unease I didn't want to examine too close. On night 5, I mentioned it to one of the other photographers, a woman named Priya, who'd been doing shipboard photography for almost 6 years across multiple ships, easily the most senior person on our team. I expected her to laugh it off. Instead, she went quiet, took out her own phone, and pulled up a folder of nearly identical photos, the same blurred, dark-suited figure captured over the course of her career on 3 different ships in this same fleet, always at formal night portrait stations, always near a staircase or atrium landing. She told me every photographer she'd ever worked with long-term on this fleet eventually collected a version of this same folder, and that none of them talked about it openly because it sounded insane, and because corporate had, on at least one occasion she knew of personally, quietly terminated a photographer's contract early after that photographer tried to raise it formally with a shoreside manager, officially for performance issues, though her friend group among the crew never believed that was the real reason. She told me the crew legend, and she was careful to call it exactly that, a legend, not a fact, was that the figure was tied to a maritime tradition far older than any specific ship, a belief among sailors going back centuries that a vessel occasionally keeps the presence of someone who died aboard it, especially someone who died suddenly, unexpectedly, in a place of celebration rather than tragedy, because the emotional charge of the moment somehow anchors. Formal night, she pointed out, staircases, portraits, moments of joy and dressing up and being looked at and photographed. These are, statistically, exactly the settings where a certain number of documented shipboard sudden death incidents have historically occurred over the decades. This particular fleet has operated, heart attacks and falls disproportionately clustered around big formal social events rather than quiet moments, something she said she'd heard a retired ship's doctor mention once at a crew happy hour years earlier, as a genuine, if grim, statistical curiosity of the job. I told myself I would finish the sailing and simply be more careful with my portrait framing going forward. I did not expect night 6. Night 6 was the sailing's second and final formal night, always the busiest of the week because it's the last chance for guests to buy photo packages before disembarkation, and my line at the staircase stretched almost 40 families deep by 8 p.m. Around 9:30, a family stepped up that I remember clearly even now, a mother, a father, and a boy who couldn't have been older than 9, The mother laughing at something the father had just said. The boy tugging at his little clip-on bow tie, the way kids do when they're uncomfortable in formal wear. I set them on my marks, counted down, and took the screen to check exposure before printing. The dark-suited figure was there again, this time standing directly behind the boy, close enough that its blurred hand appeared to be resting on the boy's shoulder. And for the first time in 6 nights of seeing this thing, it was not blurred through the frame the way a walking passenger blurs. It was in sharp, still focus, exactly as clear as the family itself. The only soft or wrong thing about it being that it had no face where a face should be, just a smooth, pale absence beneath dark, neatly combed hair. I did not retake that photo. I told the family there had been a technical issue, and I needed to reshoot for their own benefit. My voice steady in a way I still don't fully understand given how badly my hands were shaking, and the second shot was clean the way it always had been. I printed them a beautiful photo. I smiled. I told the boy he looked very handsome. And the second they walked away, I told Tyler I needed a 5-minute break, walked into the crew stairwell behind our set, and sat down on the metal steps and cried, quietly, for the full 5 minutes, because something about that hand on that particular boy's shoulder had felt less like a passive, lingering presence and more like a claim. I finished my shift. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, our last full sea day before returning to Miami, I heard through the crew grapevine, and this spreads fast on a ship, faster than any official announcement, that a family had reported their 9-year-old son missing from their cabin sometime before dawn. I don't know, and to this day have never confirmed whether it was the same family from my staircase photo the night before. There were multiple families with young boys aboard that sailing, and ship security did not release names to crew outside their department. The search lasted the rest of that day and into the next. The full protocol, cabin to cabin, deck to deck, tender boats out on the water once we made port, and as far as I ever learned, working my contract out over the following 2 months before I quietly declined to renew, that boy was never found. I kept that private folder of flawed first shots for almost a year afterward, telling myself I'd eventually delete it, needing, I think, some kind of proof for myself that I hadn't imagined any of it. I deleted every photo in that folder eventually, all except one, the one from that final formal night, the boy with his hand-tugged bow tie and his mother mid-laugh, and that smooth, faceless, sharply focused figure resting its hand on his small shoulder, like it had already decided something the rest of us hadn't been told yet. I still have that photo. It's on an external hard drive in a box in my closet in San Antonio that I have not opened in over a year. I don't look at it. I don't delete it either, because some part of me believes that photo is the only proof that boy ever stood on that staircase at all, laughing, uncomfortable in his little suit, still safely, fully, entirely alive, for exactly one more night. Story 4. The graveyard shift on Deck Zero. There's a deck on every large cruise ship that never appears on the little laminated maps they hand out at check-in, and I spent 4 months working on it before I understood why passengers are never ever supposed to know it exists. My name is Curtis Evance, and back when this happened I was 29, originally from Akron, Ohio, working as a night shift engine utility hand on a large cruise ship sailing 7-night routes out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, down through the Eastern Caribbean. I'd spent 6 years before that doing maintenance work on offshore oil platforms in the Gulf, which is brutal, isolating work, but it paid well and it toughened me up for long stretches away from home. When a buddy of mine told me cruise ships hired engine crew with offshore experience, paid decently, and fed you 3 meals a day without you having to cook them yourself, it sounded like a step up. I didn't think too hard about what night shift Deck Zero actually meant on the job posting. I should have. Deck Zero is real. It's not a myth or crew slang. Below the lowest deck passengers can access, below even the crew cabins and the laundry facilities and the massive kitchens, there's a level that houses the engine rooms, the ballast systems, the sewage treatment plant, the incinerators, and long stretches of service corridor that run the entire 700-foot length of the ship. It's loud down there in a way that gets into your bones, a constant mechanical hum from 4 diesel engines the size of school buses, and it's hot, and it smells like diesel and salt, and, closer to the treatment areas, things I won't describe in detail. My shift ran from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, checking gauges, walking assigned rounds, logging temperatures, mostly boring, repetitive work punctuated by brief moments of real danger if something actually broke. I worked with a rotation of other guys on nights, but the man I spent the most time with was my direct partner for rounds, a quiet Ukrainian engineer named Bodan who'd been with the fleet almost 9 years. Bodan didn't talk much in the beginning. It took me almost 6 weeks of shared silent walks down the same steel corridors, headlamps cutting through the gloom past pipes wrapped in insulation and yellow caution signage, before he started opening up to me at all. And even then it was mostly small talk about his kids back home, missing his wife's cooking, that kind of thing. The first strange thing I noticed had nothing to do with ghosts or anything I would have called supernatural at the time. It was a locked door. Deck Zero has dozens of doors. Storage, electrical rooms, pump rooms, all marked with stenciled numbers and clear signage, all opening with the same universal crew key that every engine department worker carries. Except one, near the aft section past the number 3 engine room, a plain steel door with no stencil, no number, nothing but a keypad lock instead of a standard key slot. The only one of its kind I ever saw anywhere on the ship. I asked Bodan about it on one of our rounds in my second month, and he did something I hadn't seen him do before. He physically sped up his walking pace until we were well past it, and only then, in a lower voice than usual, told me not to ask about that door again. Not to anyone, not even as a joke in the crew mess. I let it go for a while. A lot of things go on a ship where you're too tired most of the time to chase down every odd detail. But a few weeks later, on a night when the seas were rough enough that we could feel the whole engine room shift under our boots with each swell, Bodan and I were doing an unscheduled check after an alarm triggered on one of the ballast pumps, and our route took us right past that unmarked door again. This time, it was very slightly open, maybe an inch, held that way by something wedged in the frame, and there was a sound coming from inside. A low, rhythmic thumping. Not mechanical, not the kind of sound any pump or engine makes, more like something soft striking something hard over and over at almost exactly the pace of a slow heartbeat. I looked at Bodan. His face had gone the color of the gray steel around us. He grabbed my arm hard and pulled me past the door without a word, and we finished our ballast check in silence, and it was only back in the crew mess afterward, over stale coffee at 4 a.m, that he finally told me what he knew. Speaking so quietly, I had to lean across the table to hear him over the ever-present hum of the ship. He told me that every ship in this fleet, and several fleets he'd worked for before this one, kept what senior engine crew called, in low voices, a quiet room. A space below decks, always unmarked, always keypad locked, access restricted to the chief engineer and a small handful of senior staff officially logged in ship documentation under some bland utility designation that would mean nothing to an inspector glancing at a deck plan. He said the purpose of these rooms, according to what he'd been told over the years by other long-time engine crew, some of it firsthand, some of it passed down as a kind of dark inheritance of shipboard knowledge, was to temporarily hold a body. Not a body from natural causes. Those go through official channels, the ship's small morgue facility near medical, proper documentation, notification of authorities at the next port. He meant a different category of death, the kind cruise lines are legally required to report but are financially and reputationally desperate to control the timing and framing of before they do. A passenger who died under suspicious circumstances, a crew member who died in an altercation with another crew member, anything where an immediate, visible response, police boarding at the next port, a public investigation, news cameras on the dock, could tank a sailing, terrify thousands of paying passengers mid-cruise, and cost the company millions in lawsuits and canceled future booking. Bodan said the quiet room existed to buy the company time. Time to notify corporate legal, time to draft a controlled statement, time to get the ship to a port where the situation could be handled with minimal public visibility, sometimes as much as 48 hours after a death, all while thousands of passengers upstairs kept eating buffet food and taking pictures at the pool completely unaware. I asked him if he'd ever actually seen inside it. He said once, years earlier, on a different ship, he'd been called in during a night shift to help move something heavy through a service corridor. No explanation given, and the chief engineer at the time had made it very clear, without saying so directly, that questions were not welcome and that his continued employment depended on his silence. He said he didn't know for certain what he'd helped move that night. He said he'd made himself not know on purpose, because knowing for certain would have meant he couldn't keep doing this job, and he had 2 kids in Odessa who needed him to keep doing this job. I want to tell you I reported this immediately, went to Human Resources, made a scene. I didn't. I was 29 years old, $4,000 in debt, 6 months into a contract I couldn't easily break without eating a massive penalty fee written into my hiring agreement, and I told myself, The way I think most people tell themselves things they don't want to look at too closely, that this was probably exaggerated crew folklore, the kind of dark joke people who work grueling, isolating jobs tell each other to make the monotony feel less crushing. I kept working my rounds. I kept walking past that door. I told myself I hadn't really heard what I thought I'd heard. Then, in my fourth night sailing in late February, a passenger went missing. This part is publicly documented. I've kept the news clipping, a short piece that ran in a South Florida paper, because after everything else I needed at least one piece of proof I could hold in my hands that I hadn't fabricated the whole ordeal in my head. A 35-year-old man traveling with a group of friends from Dallas, Texas, was reported missing by his group on the fourth night of the sailing, after he failed to return from what he told them was a walk to get some air. Ship security did the standard search. The official incident report, later obtained by the family's attorney and referenced in that news piece, concluded he had likely gone overboard, an accident, possibly alcohol-related. Case closed within the framework cruise lines use for these situations. No criminal investigation pursued, given the difficulty of investigating an open ocean disappearance. Here's what the news article could not know, because I never told anyone until now. 2 nights before that man was reported missing, on my usual overnight rounds with Bodan, we found the unmarked door not just cracked open, but standing fully ajar, propped with a fire extinguisher, light spilling out into the corridor from inside. The first and only time in 4 months I ever saw it open enough to see inside. Bodan grabbed my arm to pull me past it the way he always did. But this time I resisted, just for a second, just long enough to glance through the gap. I saw a folded tarp on a metal table. I saw the chief engineer, a heavy-set man named Delgado, who I'd only ever interacted with during official briefings, standing with his back to the door, speaking in low, urgent tones to someone I couldn't see, on a satellite phone rather than the standard ship radio every other department used. And on the floor near the base of the table, I saw a man's dress shoe, expensive-looking, the kind of shoe someone wears out to dinner on formal night, sitting alone, no matching pair anywhere in sight. Bodan pulled me hard enough that I stumbled, and we walked the rest of that round faster than I'd ever walked it, and neither of us said a single word until we clocked out at 7 that morning. 2 nights later, the announcement went out over the ship's internal system that a passenger was missing. The search began, and by the time we docked back in Fort Lauderdale at the end of that sailing, it had already been quietly folded into the same category as every other tragic but unremarkable overboard incident the industry logs and moves past within a single news cycle. I didn't say anything to security. I want to be honest about why. I was afraid, genuinely afraid, in a way that had nothing to do with ghosts and everything to do with the very real, very human calculation that a company willing to keep an unmarked room below decks for handling inconvenient deaths was not a company that would respond well to a night shift utility worker asking pointed questions about what he'd seen through a propped open door. I finished that contract. I did not renew it. I went back to offshore platform work within 2 months of getting off that ship, and I have never once considered going back to cruise work since. No matter how good the pay sounds when a recruiter calls, I looked into it later, from home, safely on land. The way you research something you're too afraid to think about while you're still trapped on the thing itself. I found industry statistics, public, easily searchable, showing that cruise lines report a genuine, if small, number of man-overboard incidents every single year across the whole industry, most involving young men, often at night, often with alcohol involved, and that the recovery rate in these cases hovers in the single digits, meaning the vast overwhelming majority are simply never found and never fully explained, closed out as presumed accidental. I don't know how many of those cases might have passed through a room like the one I saw. I don't know if Bodan is still working that ship, or any ship. We lost touch after I left, the way you do with people you shared something with that neither of you ever wants to talk about again. What I do know is this. I know what a folded tarp on a metal table looks like under fluorescent light. I know what one dress shoe sitting alone on a steel floor looks like when there's no matching pair anywhere nearby to explain it. And I know that somewhere below the waterline of a ship that is, right now, probably docked at some sunny Caribbean port with thousands of happy people snapping photos on its top deck, there is a door with no number on it, and a keypad instead of a lock, and a chief engineer who knows exactly what that door is for. And I know that the shoe I saw on that floor never once, in any official report, in any conversation with the family's attorney, in any account given to the small South Florida paper that ran 3 paragraphs about a tragic accident at sea, was ever mentioned by anyone at all. Story 5, twice. I have a boarding photo of myself from a cruise I took in the summer of 2019, and in it, standing just over my left shoulder in the security line, blurred but unmistakably present, is another version of me. Same haircut, same red sundress I wore that day, and I did not notice her until 11 months later. And by then it was already too late to ask anyone what she meant. My name is Whitney Sorensen. I was 33 that summer, living in Scottsdale, Arizona, working as a dental hygienist, and I'd booked a 5-night solo cruise out of Galveston, Texas, as a kind of reward to myself after a rough divorce finalized that spring. I want to say up front that I am not, and never have been, someone who believes in ghosts or premonitions or anything like that. I'm a practical person. I floss my own teeth twice a day, and I balance my checkbook by hand even though my bank has an app. I'm telling you this because that what happened to me on that ship, and in the months after it, was not something I went looking for, and it took a very long time before I let myself accept that I hadn't imagined any of it. The ship was a mid-sized vessel doing a short run down to Cozumel and back, popular with solo travelers and small groups because of the price point. I boarded on a Sunday morning, humid Texas heat already thick by 9 a.m., the kind that makes your clothes stick before you've even made it through the terminal doors. Embarkation day on a cruise is chaos in a very specific, photographed way. You shuffle through a security checkpoint, get your passport scanned, and at one particular point, right before you step onto the gangway itself, a ship photographer snaps a boarding photo of you that you can buy later in the ship's photo gallery, usually a candid, slightly awkward shot of you mid-stride with a lanyard around your neck and sunglasses pushed up on your head. Mine is exactly that kind of photo. I bought the print on day 3, more out of habit than anything. I collect boarding photos from every trip I take, keep them in a little album, and I didn't look at it closely again until I was unpacking that album almost a year later, in the spring of 2020, sorting through old trip mementos during the strange, static months everyone spent stuck at home that year. That's when I saw her. The photo shows me walking through the security line, half turned toward the camera the way you do when someone calls your name to get you to look up. Behind my left shoulder, in the queue that should have been at least 4 or 5 people back based on how boarding lines are typically spaced, there's a blurred figure close enough to be standing directly behind me, wearing what is unmistakably the same red sundress I had on that day, with the same dark shoulder-length haircut I had at the time. It's not a clean, obvious double. It's soft focus, motion blurred the way a person walking quickly through frame gets blurred. The kind of imperfection you'd normally write off instantly as a lens artifact or another passenger who happened to be wearing something similar. Except I remembered distinctly standing in that line completely alone, and I remembered just as distinctly that no other woman in that boarding queue had been wearing red that day, because I remembered feeling slightly self-conscious about how bright my dress was compared to everyone else's neutral travel clothes. I sat with that photo before I let myself feel anything about it. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow, my own brain pattern-matching nonsense into meaning the way brains do. I put the album away. I didn't think about it again for almost 2 months. Then I started having the dream. I want to describe this carefully because I know how it sounds, and I promise you I know how it sounds. In the dream, I am back on that ship, in my cabin, which in the dream is always slightly wrong. The furniture in a different arrangement than my actual cabin had, the porthole where a window shouldn't be on a cabin at that deck level. And I'm getting ready to go out for the evening, doing my makeup at the little desk mirror, and when I look up, there's a second reflection in the mirror behind my own, a woman in a red sundress, and she is doing the exact same motions I am doing, a half second behind me, like an echo. I turn around to look at her directly. I just watch her in the mirror, matching me, always slightly delayed, and every time, right before I wake up, she stops moving entirely while I'm still mid-motion, and just watches me through the mirror instead. And that's when I always jolt awake, heart going, sheets damp. I had that same variations, 11 times over about 4 months. I finally mentioned it to my sister Kayla, mostly as a strange anecdote over a phone call, expecting her to laugh it off with me the way I wanted to laugh it off myself. Instead, she went quiet for a moment and told me something I hadn't known, something our mother had apparently told her years earlier and asked her not to repeat unless it ever seemed relevant, which is a genuinely unsettling thing to hear your sister say about your own life. Our mother had been pregnant with twins when she was carrying me. I knew that much already. It wasn't a secret, just something that had never come up much growing up. A fact filed away the way families file away old medical footnotes. What I hadn't known, what Kayla told me that night, was that the second twin had been lost very early, in the first trimester, a condition sometimes called vanishing twin syndrome, where one twin's tissue is essentially reabsorbed and the pregnancy continues with a single surviving baby, which in this case was me. Our mother had, according to Kayla, always had an odd private superstition about it, something she'd apparently said once years ago, half joking, half not, that she sometimes felt like she was raising two daughters in one body, that I'd occasionally, as a small child, referred to a friend nobody else could see, using a name our mother had privately already picked out for the twin who hadn't made it, a name she'd never told anyone, not even my father, until the day she heard 3-year-old me say it out loud to an empty room. I'm not a person who finds it easy to sit with that kind of information. I spent a long time afterward trying to explain it away with logic. Coincidence, half-remembered childhood imagination, my sister misremembering a story our mother told once, years ago, in a way that had gotten distorted over time the way family stories do. But the timing of it, coming right after that photo, right after those dreams, sat in my stomach in a way logic didn't fully dissolve. I want to tell you what happened when I finally worked up the nerve to book another solo cruise the following year, on a different ship, in a strange, half-conscious attempt to either prove to myself the first photo had been nothing, or to see if it happened again. I told myself it was just a vacation. I don't fully believe that's all it was, looking back. This second boarding photo, taken at a different port, Miami this time, not Galveston, a different photographer, a different ship entirely, shows the same thing, not similar. The same thing, close enough in composition that when I laid both printed photos side by side on my kitchen table that night, hands shaking, I had to sit. Same blurred figure just over my left shoulder. Same red dress, which I had specifically, almost defiantly, worn again on purpose that day, daring whatever this was to show up if it was going to. Same haircut, though by then my actual hair had grown out several inches longer than the figures, meaning whatever appeared in that photo did not match my current appearance at all. It matched exactly how I'd looked 2 years earlier, on that very first cruise. I didn't sleep well the rest of that sailing. I kept catching myself checking mirrors a half-second too long, watching for a delay in my own reflection that never actually came while I was awake and looking for it, which was somehow worse than if it had. On the third night, unable to sleep at all, I went up to the top deck around 2 a.m, empty except for a lone crew member doing rounds, the ocean black and enormous in every direction, no lights but the ship's own. And I stood at the railing for a long time just breathing, trying to talk myself down from something I couldn't fully name. And I felt very distinctly, more than I saw, someone come and stand beside me at the railing. I turned, fully expecting the crew member, ready to make some embarrassed small talk about not being able to sleep. There was no one there, but the railing beside me, where a person's hands would have rested, was cold in a very specific, localized way that the rest of the railing wasn't, cold enough that when I touched it, my own hand recoiled before my brain had consciously decided to move it. I flew home 2 days early. I paid the change fee without hesitating. I have not booked a solo cruise since, and when my company does its annual trip, we went on a group cruise for a work incentive program 2 years ago, I made an excuse involving a family obligation rather than get back on a ship because some quiet, stubborn part of me has decided I am simply not willing to find out what happens on a third boarding photo. I still have both. I keep them in a drawer, not the album, separate from my other trip mementos, because I found I couldn't look at them next to my normal happy vacation pictures without a specific, hollow kind of dread settling into my chest. Sometimes, very late at night, doing something ordinary like brushing my teeth in front of the bathroom mirror, I catch myself watching my own reflection just a beat too long, waiting to see if it moves exactly when I do, and I have never yet caught it lagging behind. But I have also never yet fully convinced myself that I would. Story 6. The entertainment contract nobody wanted to explain. 3 different dancers warned me not to take the job before I ever signed the contract, and every single one of them refused to tell me why, which is the exact kind of warning that should have stopped me and instead, at 24 years old and desperate for stable work, made me sign faster. My name is Jordan Alvarez. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I'd been a working dancer since I was 18. Casino showroom gigs, the occasional touring production, the kind of career where you're always one bad knee away from unemployment and always hustling for the next contract. When a booking agent I'd worked with before called me about an opening in a cruise ship's resident dance company, 6-month contract, decent pay, room and board covered, I didn't hesitate. Cruise entertainment work has a reputation among dancers as steady, if grueling. 2 shows a night, 5 nights a week, rehearsals during the day, but a guaranteed paycheck in an industry where guarantees are rare. The warnings started before I'd even left Las Vegas. I mentioned the job to a woman I'd danced with years earlier at a strip show, someone who'd done 2 cruise contracts herself, and her whole face changed when I told her which ship. She asked me, very directly, if it was for the resident company or if I was replacing someone specific. And when I said I understood I was replacing a dancer who'd left partway through her contract, she told me, flatly, not to take it. And when I pushed her to explain why, she said only that some contracts on that particular ship don't finish clean, and changed the subject in a way that made it clear she wasn't going to elaborate no matter how many times I asked. I got a similar reaction, almost word for word, from 2 other dancers in the following weeks, both people I trusted, neither willing to give me specifics. I told myself it was industry gossip, maybe some petty drama about a choreographer nobody liked, or a rumor about bad contract terms that had gotten exaggerated through the grapevine the way these things do. I signed anyway. I flew out to meet the ship in San Juan, Puerto Rico in March, joining mid-season the way replacement dancers usually do, stepping into a rehearsal process in a company of people who already knew each other and their routines far better than I did. The company itself was warm enough, professionally speaking. 8 dancers, 2 singers, a small live band, a resident choreographer named Felix, who ran a tight, demanding rehearsal, but wasn't cruel about it. What struck me almost immediately, though, was how careful everyone was around any mention of the dancer I was replacing. Her name was Camille, and I only knew that much because it was still oddly listed on some of the older rehearsal paperwork nobody had bothered updating. Every time I asked a direct question about her, what happened, why she'd left partway through, whether she'd gotten hurt or just quit, I got vague, deflecting answers. She had to leave early. Personal reasons. It's not really something we talk about. Felix, usually happy to chat about company history and old productions, went noticeably tight-lipped anytime her name came up, redirecting the conversation back to blocking and counts within a sentence or 2. The role I'd inherited from Camille was a featured spot in the ship's signature production number, a large-scale routine performed in the main theater on formal nights, built around an ocean and mermaid theme, heavy on aerial silkwork suspended above the stage. It was, honestly, a beautiful piece of choreography, and I was excited to learn it, right up until my 3rd rehearsal, when I noticed something strange about the silk apparatus itself. Cruise ship theaters, especially on larger vessels, often have genuinely impressive rigging for aerial work, reinforced points in the ceiling, motorized winches, safety harnesses built into the costume design. During my 3rd rehearsal, working through the silk sequence for the first time under Felix's direction, I noticed a section of silk, maybe 18 inches, near the very top of one length of fabric, that had clearly been cut out and replaced with a slightly different shade of red than the rest of the material. Subtle, the kind of thing you'd only notice if you were staring right at it the way I was, hanging almost 20 feet above the stage floor with my hands wrapped in the fabric just below that patched section. I asked our stage manager, a no-nonsense woman named Priscilla who'd been with the fleet almost a decade, about the patch, expecting some boring answer about wear and tear or a manufacturing defect. She hesitated, which for Priscilla, someone I'd already clocked as extremely matter-of-fact about everything, felt significant, before telling me the silk had needed minor repair work a few months earlier and leaving it at that. I let it go at the time. I had 8 counts of choreography to nail down and a company that was still, understandably, sizing up whether the new girl could keep pace. It was one of the singers, a soft-spoken man named Desmond, who'd been with the company almost 2 years, who finally told me what had actually happened, and only because I caught him alone one night in the crew bar after a show, both of us nursing drinks we couldn't really afford on our per diems, and I asked him directly, point blank, what happened to Camille, framing it as wanting to understand the choreography's full history rather than as morbid curiosity, though at that point it had honestly become exactly that. He told me Camille had fallen during a performance, roughly 4 months before I joined, during that same silk sequence, from close to the same height I'd been rehearsing at. He said the working theory, informal and never fully confirmed to the cast in any official capacity, was that a safety clip on her harness had failed, though the company's official statement to the crew afterward had been carefully worded around terms like medical episode, rather than anything involving equipment failure, which struck several of the dancers who'd been there that night as an obvious attempt to get ahead of liability questions before they could be asked. She survived the fall, according to Desmond, but had been medevaced off the ship at the next port with severe spinal injuries. and as far as anyone in the company had heard since, through whatever second-hand channels dancers use to track what happens to people who vanish from a contract mid-season, she had not walked again. I asked him why nobody would just tell me that directly, instead of dancing around it for weeks. He said it was partly out of respect for Camille, not wanting to turn her accident into gossip fodder for a new hire, but partly, he admitted, quieter, something closer to superstition. Several people in the company had noticed that in the month since, that specific silk sequence seemed to produce more minor injuries than any other number in the show's repertoire, small things individually explainable. A dancer rolling an ankle on landing, a rigging malfunction that stopped a rehearsal early, one performer developing a sudden unexplained fear of heights partway through the contract despite years of prior aerial experience. But taken together, enough that more than one company member had started quietly, privately, requesting to be swapped out of that section of the choreography whenever Felix would allow it. I want to tell you I took this information seriously and requested a transfer myself. I didn't, largely out of the same practical desperation that had made me sign the contract in the first place. Replacement dancers who cause friction early in a contract get a reputation, and reputation is currency in an industry this small. I told myself Desmond's account was exactly the kind of thing that happens when a group of people spend months together in close quarters, isolated at sea, primed by one genuinely traumatic event to start pattern matching ordinary bad luck into something more sinister. I kept rehearsing the number. I got good at it. By my 6th week, I was doing the full sequence cleanly, confidently, 20 feet above a stage full of formally dressed strangers who had no idea what they were watching, had a history. The incident that finally broke something loose in me happened on a Thursday night, formal night, a packed house, maybe 1,100 people in the theater. I was mid-sequence, wrapped in the silk exactly the way I'd rehearsed it dozens of times by then, when I felt distinctly a hand press flat against the center of my back, right between my shoulder blades, at a point in the choreography where I was entirely alone in the air, no other dancer within 10 feet of me, no rigging or apparatus anywhere near that part of my body. It wasn't a shove. It was steady, deliberate pressure, held for maybe a full second. The exact sensation of someone's palm resting against you, and then it was gone, and I finished the sequence on pure muscle memory because my conscious mind had, for those last 30 seconds of the number, gone almost entirely blank with a fear I didn't have a name for yet. I came down from that rig at the end of the number shaking badly enough that another dancer, noticing during our bow, quietly steadied my elbow as we exited the stage. I didn't tell anyone what I'd felt that night. Not even Desmond. Not for almost 2 weeks, terrified that saying it out loud would either make people think I was unraveling under the pressure of the role, or worse, that they would simply nod and tell me matter-of-factly that this happens sometimes, the way they'd talked about Camille, and I wasn't ready to hear that confirmed by someone else. When I finally did tell Desmond, quietly, in the crew bar again, he didn't look surprised, which somehow frightened me more than if he had. He told me, carefully, that Camille had told the company during a video call she'd done with a few close friends from the cast shortly after her medevac, still in a hospital bed, still processing what had happened to her, that in the moments right before her fall, she'd felt exactly what I was describing. A hand, flat, deliberate, pressed against her back, right at the center point between her shoulder blades, in a section of the choreography where no other dancer or piece of rigging should have been anywhere near that part of her body. I finished my contract. I did the sequence every performance for the remaining 4 months, because breaking a contract early carries financial penalties I couldn't afford, and because honestly some stubborn part of me refused to let whatever that was chase me off a stage I'd worked hard to earn a place on. But I never again felt fully alone up in that rigging, not once, for the rest of that contract. A low, constant awareness at the edge of my senses that I was sharing that particular 18 inches of air with something or someone that had been there long before I arrived, and as far as I know, is very likely still there now, waiting for whichever dancer gets handed that same red silk next.